The calculus of aging offers us two options. We can live shorter life with more years of disabilities, or we can live the longest possible life with the fewest bad years.
If there really is a secret to living longer, Dan Buettner has come the closest to cracking the code. As an explorer, Buettner discovered the blue zones, the 5 places in the world where people live the longest, healthiest lives. Now, Buettner's mission is to share those lessons with the masses. A National Geographic Fellow, award-winning journalist and producer, and New York Times best-selling author, Buettner's Blue Zone Project has dramatically improved the health of 5 million Americans to date. And now, Dan Buettner.
What a nice video. Thank you very much. I feel like I'm among my tribe. I have 25 minutes here. We're going to have some fun. I'm going to talk about the world's longest lived people and the lessons they offer us. But first, with these 8 questions, I'm going to start with you and calculate how long each and every one of you are going to live. And your job, number 1, is to raise your hand when the question pertains to you. And number 2, remember how many times you raised your hand. So, easy stuff. So first question. This questions, by the way, start easy and then get hard. First question. Raise your hand if you sleep at least 7.5 hours most nights. 7.5 hours. Okay, we're a pretty well-rested crowd here at the Organic Food Subs. Last night didn't count, by the way. Okay, raise your hand if you move at least 45 minutes a day. And that could be at the gym or it could be out in your garden. 45 minutes a day. All right, most of you. Raise your hand if you eat at least 3 honest servings of organic vegetables every day, and French fries and ketchup do not count. 3, I better see every hand. All right, there are 2 of you. Raise your hand if you have not, and I underscore not, had unprotected sex with a stranger. I said not. I think I would have stayed an extra night and hang out with you guys. I like you guys already. Okay, raise your hand if you have at least 3 friends who, number 1, you can have a meaningful conversation with them. Number 2, you can call them on a bad day and they will care. And number 3, you actually like them. At least 3. There we go, almost all of you. Raise your hand if you belong to a faith. A faith-based community, Christian, Muslim, Jewish, doesn't matter. Keep your hands up. And keep your hands up if you show up at least 4 times a month. There's 2 hands, okay. Easy question. Raise your hand if you've not smoked in the last 5 years. And I mean tobacco here in California. Final question. Raise your hand if you have the desire and you believe you have the capacity or the desire and health to reach at least age 90. At least age 90. That's actually the number 1 predictor of how long you're going to live. But all these together come up with a fairly good gauge. So those of you who've raised your hand at least twice, and if you're a man, your life expectancy is 68, and if you're a woman, it's 71. If you raise your hand at least 5 times and you're a man, life expectancy is 77, and for a man 77, a woman's 82. And if you raise your hand at least 7 times and you're a man, life expectancy is 88, and if you're a woman, it's 92. Did anybody raise their hand all 8 times? Anybody raise their hand all 8 times? Well, good. I was going to send you to the cocktail lounge if you did. Because there's nothing I could tell you. So, something called the Danish twin study established that only about 20% of how long the average person lives is dictated by genes. The other 80% is lifestyle and environment. So based on that research, about 15 years ago, funded by the National Institutes on Aging and on assignment for National Geographic, we struck out to, in a sense, reverse engineer longevity, to find the demographically confirmed places where people are living statistically longest, and then first confirmed those places. That took 2 years, but then put together a methodology to distill out the common denominators. What do you see no matter where you go when people are living a long time? And remarkably, no matter whether you go to Asia or Europe or Latin America, you see the same 9 things happening over and over and over again. And I'm going to tell you what those 9 things are, but before I get there, because I have the benefit of National Geographic photography, I thought I'd very quickly take you to each of these so-called blue zones and give you a flavor for not only what they eat, but also how people live in these areas. We found our first blue zone about 200 miles off the coast of Italy on the island of Sardinia. Up in the highlands of the Nuoro province, there are 14 villages, about 40,000 people. And this is home to the world's longest lived men. This was the original blue zone. And here you see about 11 times more male centenarians than you'd find in a similar population in the United States. Not only reaching 100, but doing so with vigor, riding their bicycles till they're 92, chopping wood at 106, and beating a guy 65 years younger than him in an arm wrestle at 7 in the morning after a tumbler of red wine. You get to do that at 106. So what's going on here? Well, I work with a very clever scientist, physician in Sardinia named Gianni Pez. And over the last 15 years or so, he has interviewed more than 300 centenarians and asked them what they've done most of their lives. And it turns out there are 3 things that most highly predict reaching age 100 in Sardinia. The first one is barley consumption. We thought it might be red wine or pasta, but it's actually barley, which they grind into a flour and make the breads out of it, or they make sort of an oatmeal out of it. The second predictor is the number of daughters they have. Turns out the guys most likely to reach age 100 had 5 or more daughters. Now, we don't know if that's because daughters tend to take care of their aging fathers, or it's because if you can survive 5 adolescent girls, make it to 100, it's no problem. But it seems to work. But the biggest predictor in Sardinia is your job. The farmers in Sardinia don't live any longer than their Italian counterparts. It's the shepherds that live up in the highlands. So we embed it with these shepherds, spend a couple weeks following their lifetime, paying attention to what they eat. These people, they actually don't work all that hard. They sort of wake up when the sun's warm. They spend a few hours with their animals. Because they're pasturing sometimes weeks at a time, they've developed a very portable diet, an unleavened bread made from durum wheat, whole grain durum wheat. They're making cheese from their sheep, pecorino, grass-fed, high omega-3 fatty acids. They're homemaking their own wine, nothing like dirty boots to add terroir. It's called Cananao, and it has 3 times the level of polyphenols of any other known wine in the world. A sourdough bread. Leavened not with yeast, but with lactobacillus. And when you take the time to leaven bread properly, it metabolizes out about 99% of the glutens. This bread also lowers the glycemic load of a meal by about 25%. Looks a lot like the white bread you might buy at the grocery store, metabolically speaking, very different. They're eating mostly a Mediterranean diet, mostly vegetables they're growing on their own. They do eat some meat, but meat traditionally was a celebratory food eaten after church or during festivals, and only about 5 times per month on average. Not a lot of meat. More importantly than their diet, though, I would argue their fanatic zeal for the family, a very strong social unit there, and the way they celebrate age. Here, the older you get, the more honored you are, and it sends a message to older people that you count. They harness that wisdom to not only put it to work in agricultural circumstances, but also in raising children. And something called the grandmother effect has shown that children who have a grandmother or grandfather living even close to the family unit, not necessarily in the house, but in the same neighborhood, those children actually have lower rates of disease, lower rates of mortality, and do better in school. And plus, the older person who is engaged actually has a 4 to 6 year greater life expectancy than they would have if they were put in a retirement home. So it's this beautiful, virtuous circle. On the other side of the planet, 800 miles south of Japan on the archipelago of Okinawa, You have the world's longest lived women, about 30 times more female centenarians there than you have in the United States. Also, the longest disability-free life expectancy in the world. People live a long time, avoid the chronic diseases that are killing Americans, and then tend to die very quickly. In America, we suffer between 2.5 and 3.5 years of morbidity at the end of our lives on average. That's the time we'll spend 95% of our lifelong healthcare dollars. In Okinawa, that morbidity period is compressed to about 6 months. Makes a huge difference when it comes not only to suffering, but also healthcare cost. Their diet consists, and this made Frida very happy, until about 1960, about 60% of all the calories they consumed came from one food alone, a purple sweet potato called emo, about 8 times more tofu than we eat in the United States. Anybody recognize this vegetable? It's a goya. It's a bitter melon. 3 compounds that lowers blood sugar in the blood, lowers blood sugar. Very good for diabetics. It's also the cornerstone of the Okinawan national food, the goya champuru. Very bitter, but an acquired taste. And then turmeric. There's very good research behind each of these food things, but this is the type of food that was consumed for most centenarians for most of their lives in Okinawa. They also have very strong social networks. I asked you that question about loneliness. If you could raise your hand if you had 3 good friends. The average American has fewer than 2 good friends. If you're lonely in this country, it shaves about 8 years off your life expectancy, as bad for you as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. It's not such an issue in Okinawa because when you're a little kid, your parents put you into the committed social network called a moai. I actually have a piece in the New York Times today about these moais, but they're committed social networks that assure that people not only have figurative support, but actually literal support their entire lives. These 5 ladies have belonged to the same moai for 97 years. Their average age is 102. They get together every night, gossip, drink sake, argue about who that hot guy liked best back in 1941, but really look after each other. Also, Okinawa doesn't even have a word for retirement. Instead, the word ikigai, the reason for which I wake up in the morning, imbues their entire adult life. So they're always purposed fueled. In the United States here, we found the blue zone in a very unusual place, about 80 miles southeast of Los Angeles, down the San Bernardino Freeway. You exit at the Loma Linda exit, 6 lanes of traffic, and the first thing you see is a Wiener Hut and a Del Taco. And it's like, what's going on here? Well, it turns out that Loma Linda, California, it has the world's highest concentration of Seventh-day Adventists, conservative Christians who have put health at the forefront of their evangelism for over 120 years. And indeed, the National Institutes on Health have funded this enormous Adventist health study, which has followed 102,000 Americans for 30 years. So it's gold standard epidemiology. So life expectancy for women in this country right now is about 80. But for Adventist women, they're living about 9 years longer. And for the men, the difference is even more remarkable. They're living about 11 years longer. So think about this for a minute. Here you have Americans, much like those of us sitting in the audience right here, living next to the Del Taco and the Wiener Hut, living a decade longer than the average or their counterparts in California. What's going on here? Well, first of all, they take their diet directly from the Bible. Genesis chapter 1, verse 24 through 26, God talks about every tree that bears fruit and every plant that bears seeds. Presumably she meant organic. But so that's beans and legumes and nuts and seeds of all sorts. So the Adventists take this quite literally. And most Adventists, at least the longest lived ones, are either vegan, vegetarian, or pescatarian. They take their Sabbath very seriously, and for 24 hours they really downshift, connect, Saturday afternoon, they take a nature walk, the definition of which has evolved over the decades, but nevertheless, they're getting fresh air. And they tend to hang out with other Adventists. So the contagions, the social contagions that circulate through these groups tend to be positive. It's a religion that has yielded Ellsworth Wareham, multimillionaire, 95 years old, yet when a contractor wants $6,000 to build a privacy fence in his backyard, he's like, well, for that kind of money, I'll do it myself. And for the next 3 days, we followed him around in the hot sun as he shoveled cement and hauled timbers. And on the fourth day, predictably perhaps, he ends up in the operating room. But that's not Ellsworth on the table getting open heart surgery. That's Ellsworth there to the left doing open heart surgery. She continued to do till age 97. Ed Rawlings, 106-year-old working cowboy, starts his day with the swim, and on the weekends he puts on the boards. And then 105-year-old Marge Jeton, who wakes up at 5:30 in the morning. She reads her Bible. She has her oatmeal. She's very prescriptive about her breakfast. Steel-cut, slow-cook oatmeal with dates, topped with soy milk, followed by what she called a prune juice shooter. So imagine that and then move it right on out. Pumps iron, rides her bicycle, and then gets in her Cadillac where she barrels down the San Bernardino Freeway volunteering for 6 different organizations, including the Loma Linda Senior Center where she helps out the old folks. So I wrote up these 3 cultures for National Geographic. It was a very successful issue, and wrote a book, Blue Zones, which was a New York Times bestseller. And for the first time in my life, I had money. And like a good explorer, I went right away and blew it all, hiring the demographers that I met writing the story to set out to find more of these Blue Zones hotspots. With help from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, we found a 4th Blue Zone in Nicoya Peninsula of Costa Rica. Interestingly, here people have the lowest rate of middle-age mortality, which means as a middle-ager, they have the best chance of reaching a healthy age 92, an extraordinary population, largely isolated. Their diet, until about 10 years ago, consisted mainly of 3 foods, and I argue it's the best diet the human species has ever invented. 3 foods: corn, not sweet corn, but a corn they grind up to make tortillas, beans of every variety, which they cook into delicious stews, and they accompany their tacos with them. They put them in their tortillas, and then a squash. They call it ayote, which they'll make stews out of it, but they also tend to have it almost every meal. They grow all over the place. They grow in these milpas. When you mix beans, corn, and squash together, those 3 foods combine to not only give you all the complex carbohydrates you need, most of the trace minerals, and also all the amino acids, which is to say proteins that you need for human sustenance. You don't need meat, you don't need pork or beef or chicken. These 3 foods together will give you all the protein you need to sustain yourself, build muscle, whatever else you like to do with protein. Extraordinarily, too, we found that among the population, the healthiest people, we have this situation in our country, which you guys know very well, that you need to be fairly well off in order to afford healthy organic foods all the time. Here in Costa Rica, it's actually the poorest people who are most likely to reach 100. We even checked their telomeres, their caps at the end of their genes, and found that the telomeres in the poorest people indicated they were the, biologically speaking, the youngest. So you have this interesting paradox going on here. And then finally, we found the last Blue Zone about 20 miles off the coast of Turkey on the island of Icaria, Greece. Isolated island. There were no real ports, so it was largely overlooked by Western civilization. Purest form of the Mediterranean diet in the world. Not only all the fruits and vegetables, a little bit of fish, but a lot more beans and a lot more greens than you'd see in Mediterranean diets, say in Spain or Italy. 4 herbs, which were used not only to spice their food, but also in teas almost every day of their lives. An oregano, a rosemary, a sage, and a mint. These herbs powerfully are not only anti-inflammatories, but they're also diuretics, lowering blood pressure and lowering it chronically for every decade of their lives. We think that's what explains the fact that these people are living about 8 years longer, about 5 times more centenarians, with 1/5 the rate of dementia that we suffer here in the United States. So they live a long time, stay sharp to the very end. Like people in all blue zones, they tend to grow a garden. Through their 9th and even 10th centuries, they're not only getting the physical activity, but they're also producing themselves the organic fruits and vegetables which fill their tables. I'd like to tell the story of this guy right here, the little fellow on the right. His name is Stamatis Moriaitis. And at age 22, he moves to America to seek his fortune and fame. He's a hard worker. He's a painter. He starts making money. He marries a Greek American, buys a house in the suburb, buys a Chevrolet, American dream. But at age 66, he finds himself short of breath. He goes to 3 doctors, all of whom tell him the same thing. You have terminal lung cancer, get your affairs in order. So instead of dying in Detroit, where he was living at the time, he moves back to Ikaria, so he could be buried on the shores of the Aegean Sea for about 1/10 of what it would cost to be buried in Detroit. That was the real reason for doing it. So he and his wife at 66 move in with his parents, who of course are healthy and fine in Ikaria. He starts drinking the teas, drinking the wine, eating that Mediterranean diet. He reconnects with his religion. 6 months comes and goes. He's actually feeling pretty good. He's supposed to be dead, but instead he goes out and plants a garden and a vineyard. Well, to make a long story medium, when I met him 34 years later at the age of 102, he was not only harvesting his vineyard, he was producing 200 liters of wine every year, all of which he drank. So of course I asked him, what's your secret to longevity? And I was pretty sure it wasn't his ability to match plaids. And he goes, I don't know, I guess I just forgot to die. Which sounds flippant, but actually he kind of hits the nail on the head. No matter where you go in the world and see spry centenarians water skiing or standing on their head or still engaged with the world, it's never because they tried. They don't have superior discipline or superior individual responsibility. They don't know how they got to live so long. They never said at age 50, well, God darn it, I'm going to get on that longevity diet and live another 50 years. They didn't call an 800 number and order supplements or buy some facial cream. They didn't join CrossFit or a gym. They just lived their life. And the key insight, the big aha and epiphany of this work is that where you see longevity, it's not because it was pursued. It's because it ensued. It was the product of the right environment. So no matter where you go in the world and see long-lived people, you see the same 9 things happening over and over again, and they're almost all environmental. Number one, they don't really exercise in the way we think of exercise, but every time they go to work or to a friend's house or to the store, it occasions a walk. They have gardens. They're out there for 2 or 3 hours every day. And if they do some intentional physical activity, it's almost always walking for fun. Our team calculated that they were nudged into physical activity every 22 minutes or so. They suffer the same stresses that we do. The difference here is that they had daily sacred rituals which they practiced that reverse the stress and inflammation from everyday living. They prayed. They took naps. They did happy hour. They took time to remember their ancestors and where they came from. They had vocabulary for purpose. Plan de vida in Costa Rica, Ikigai in Okinawa. So they didn't wake up every morning in some existential hell, what am I going to do today? It was very clear to them. It's worth about 8 extra years of life expectancy. They drank a little, and from what I heard, that went over very well here last night. On average, they're drinking 2 to maybe 3 glasses a day, almost every day. But no, you cannot save up all week long and have 14 on the weekend. In a follow-up book called The Blue Zone Solution, I worked with Harvard University to do a meta-analysis of all 5 blue zones over the last 100 years to see exactly what centenarians ate to be 100. And the result, and what I'm going to show you here, took me 8 years. I'm going to show it to you for free in about 80 seconds. Number 1, it wasn't paleo or keto or none of these other fad diets, but 90 to 100% of what they ate is plant-based food of dietary intake and a very high carbohydrate diet, by the way. But when I say carbohydrates, you have to remember that both lollipops and lentil beans are carbohydrates. So we're talking, of course, the complex carbohydrates. The 5 pillars of every longevity diet in the world is grains, whole grains, greens, tubers, nuts, and beans. If you're eating a cup of beans a day, it's probably adding about 4 extra years to your life expectancy. Maybe it's because of the fiber and the nutrients in beans, but maybe it's because if you're eating beans for your protein, you're not eating less healthy protein. We just know it works. They are eating some meat, but a celebratory food, on average, fewer than 5 times a month, about once a week, and a portion about the size of this clicker. They do eat some fish, not as much as you'd think, and it's completely different fish than what we're eating today. No cow's dairy of any significance in any blue zones. And what they were drinking, mostly water, about 6 glasses a day, tea, coffee, and a little bit of wine with friends. In fact, if you're having a glass of wine with a Mediterranean blue zone diet, it actually about triples the flavonoid absorption than it would if you just drank water. So there's actually an argument for having red wine with your meals at the end of the day. They have little tricks to keep them from overeating. Eat breakfast like a king, lunch like a prince, dinner like a pauper. They don't have electronics in their kitchens. They eat as a family. They take a minute to express some gratitude for their food, which slows them down, occasions consuming fewer calories. And then the foundation on which all of this rests, they put their family first. They keep their aging parents nearby, invest in their spouses and in their kids. They tend to belong to a faith-based community, which is worth 4 to 14 years of extra life expectancy. And they really pay close attention to who they hang out with. We now know that if your 3 best friends are obese and unhealthy, there's about 150% better chance that you'll be overweight yourself. Drug use, tobacco, alcoholism, even unhappiness is contagious. So who you surround yourself with makes a huge impact on your health behaviors, and it's measurable, and you can see it over time. So life expectancy in the United States right now for men and women is about 79, but the capacity of the human machine living in the first world is about 92. So that means we're leaving about 13 years of healthy life expectancy on the table. This pyramid offers a manifest way to achieve those 13 years, but we're missing it. And it's one thing to know the right thing, but to actually do it, that's another story altogether. In the United States, when we talk about diet and exercise, we mostly default to diet. But the problem with diets, even though they often start with the right suggestion, eat the right kind of food, Ornish and so forth, the DASH diet are all very good. If you get 100% of people to get on a diet today, even the best ones, you're going to lose 10% in 3 months, a full 90% in 7 months. Our brains are hardwired for novelty. We might be disciplined, but discipline only lasts so long. And diets almost completely fail after 2 years. So if it's a strategy to live longer, you can forget it. Same thing with exercise programs. We tend to start with a lot of zeal after the holidays and run out of gas by September. The big lesson I believe that blue zones offer us is not only the specifics of what to do, but how they show up. People move naturally and eat a plant-based diet because they're purpose-driven, because that's facilitated by the right social network and made easy by the environment they live in. So diet and exercise doesn't appear as this sort of island on its own. It's part of a mutually supporting web of characteristics that hold the right behaviors in place for not just a few months or years, but for decades and a lifetime, long enough so you're doing the right thing, so you're not getting heart disease or cancer or diabetes or dementia, all of which are largely avoidable diseases and diseases that are costing our country about $3.6 trillion a year. So over the last 10 years, I've organized a citywide program that harnesses policies, optimizing built environment, puts people who want to change their health habits together, optimizes restaurants, grocery stores, workplaces, and schools, and gives people a purpose workshop and gets them volunteering to change their environment so that the healthy choice is the easy choice. And we started in Albert Lea, Minnesota a decade ago. We brought it to California, where we lowered the BMI by 15%. The pork state, Iowa, where we actually started 11 blue zone cities. Cowtown, Fort Worth, Texas, where I was just there last week. We helped that city save about $250 million on healthcare costs over the last 5 years, and now it's kind of spread to 26 areas around the world. There's lots of different initiatives, the interventions that we do, but I'll just tell you one. In all the cities that we work on, we partner with the grocery stores, Hy-Vee, H-E-B, Whole Foods, Foodland, and we make the healthy choice, which is organic produce, the easy choice. So we spend about $3.6 trillion a year on largely avoidable diseases, and the first time in human history, life expectancy is dropping in our country, and our children are expected to live about 5 years less than we are. It's not because we are bad people or lack discipline or we love our children less than our parents loved us. It's because our environment has changed. The secret to longevity, whether it's in our own lives or in the lives of our community, is not trying to change individual behaviors, but trying to optimize the environment so the easy choice, the healthy choice is not only the easy choice, but it's the unavoidable choice. And the best example of that, a few months ago, I called up Stomatitis Moriitis, the guy with the bad plaids who drinks the 200 liters of wine a year. And I called him to see how he's doing. And after a few minutes, he said, "You got to hurry this up. I got friends coming over." And I said to him, I had one question. I said, "Did you ever figure out how you got rid of lung cancer?" And he said, yeah, I gave that a lot of thought," he said. "In fact, about 15 years ago, I went back to the United States to get some tests." And I said, "Yeah, what did you discover?" He said, "Nothing." He said, "When I got back to the States, all my doctors were dead." Thank you very much.